Alright, we're back. I guess with this video I really want to concentrate on the different type of respirators and going through respiratory protection, especially from the fire service standpoint. So if you look at all the different respiratory protection that's out there, you can kind of split it into two different groups. You have your atmosphere supplying respirators and your air purifying respirators. And the difference between the two is the atmosphere supplying does just that. It gives you breathable air. It gives you something for you to breathe in. And air purifying respirators, it only filters the air. So whatever air is out there, it just cleans whatever the bad stuff is. It doesn't actually provide you with anything. So if we look at air supplying respirators, we really have two different types of broad categories. We have the SCBA, or the self-contained breathing apparatus, and we also have the supplied air respirators. So, and then SCBAs, they fall under two different categories, open circuit and closed circuit. So we start looking at the supplied air respirators. They're really only used for firefighting. They're used in very limited areas. We're actually, in industry, we use it a lot more. So what you'll have is you'll have some sort of air supply. And if you look at my cursor, it'll be right there. Now, these are just small little tanks. In reality, you can have some very, very large tanks that will be feeding your system. We'll see them when we come into the campus, but they're large Class C tanks, Class B tanks. They're pretty good sized tanks. Then you have your air hose. Obviously, you need to get it from the supply to the person. And then you have your actual breathing system. And the breathing system is going to consist of your mask, like right here. You're going to have some sort of harness to hold all this together, and then you're going to have some sort of emergency tank. It's usually considered like an escape tank. It has usually 5 or 15 minutes of air. The idea is that you're going to be given air throughout the whole process, but all of a sudden, if that stops, you need to have enough air to actually get out, and that's what that last piece is for, is to give you that 15 minutes. Also, forgot to mention with the air supply, the other option for an air supply is you can have an air compressor, but you have to make sure your air compressor is set up for breathable air. What you don't want to have is you don't want to have the normal air you'd be running your tools off of, because that actually has oil in it to help lubricate the tools. You don't necessarily want to be breathing that stuff in. So like I said, fire departments, they basically use it for rescue scenarios, but us in industry, we use it for a lot of different things. In fact, it works a lot better many times than having to bring a self-contained breathing apparatus in. If you are looking at self-contained breathing apparatus, you basically have two different types. The one on the left is a closed circuit SCBA. And usually what happens with that is you have some sort of cartridge in, or an oxygen cylinder, or you have something in place, and you breathe in and out through that. That's very, very rare. In fact, the only time I've ever used anything similar to that was back in the the early 90s when I was in the Navy using what's called an oxygen breathing apparatus. We'd put a cartridge in it, and it would generate oxygen for us. Really, it's not used very often anymore. What is used a lot is that open circuit. What that just means is we bring air from the tank and we breathe it out in the atmosphere. And this is normal breathing air. This is whatever it is out in the atmosphere. So we have 78% oxygen, or 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, a little bit of everything else. You don't want to be breathing pure oxygen at this point, because otherwise, as soon as you exhale, as soon as it exhales, you start breathing out pure oxygen, and you basically start having problems in a fire. If you look at the components, the first component is that backpack assembly. This is what's actually going to hold everything all together and make it as easy as it is to carry. The second part would be the air cylinder assembly. So you have actually the air cylinder here that gets attached onto the backpack assembly. Then you get your regulators. You have a couple different styles depending on the brand. You have some regulators like this one that the regulator hooks right into the mask, and you have others. This is an older model that the regulator is on the belt, and then you'll actually have a hose that comes from the valve up to the face mask. And then the last part is the face mask itself. It's just like a lot of other respirators you may use. These are designed a little bit differently in the straps, where it's more of a mesh. It's designed to get on very, very quickly. But here you have a nose cup. That's just there to prevent fogging. You have your overall face lens there, some straps, the net covering, nose cup in the middle, other straps, and your regulator is going to fit right here. Then you have some speaking diaphragms. A lot of times you may also see on one side, you may see a speaker that just to amplify whatever it is that you're saying. As you can imagine, you talk through one of these, it can be hard to understand you at sometimes. When you are doing these respiratory or using the respirators, a couple things you have to have. First of all, you have to be fit tested. We have to be able to test you to make sure that you know, and that we know that it's actually providing fresh air. The second one, you look at the middle picture, facial hair. You can't be wearing facial hair with an SCBA, an SAR, or really any type of respirator. If the respirator comes in contact with hair, at the end of the day, you're just not going to be able to it's not going to seal as well as it needs to. And the last thing is you need to either wear contact lenses or approved glasses. There'll be glasses that actually pop right into the mask. That way you can still see. And they says contact lenses again. This is for firefighters. They're okay with that. In industry, contact lenses are kind of frowned upon in respirators because if a lens comes out and you can't see, that kind of ends up being a problem. A couple other things. End of service time indicator. What that's going to be, it's going to be something that says how much air is left. It's going to go from green to yellow to red, and let you know when you're out of air. You're going to have it maybe on the outside of the tank like this. You're also going to have it on a gauge, pressure gauge. It's going to tell you. A lot of your masks also have a heads-up display that will tell you when you're running out of air. Another one, this rapid intervention crew. The idea of this is it's if you're in a fire, you've run out of oxygen, and you partner up with somebody else, you plug into the air tank, then you're both breathing off of theirs. So that's pretty much all the air supplying respirators. Now we start getting into the air purifying respirators, and they all a little different, but they definitely they all work in the exact same way. So you have the one on the left here is the full face piece respirator. The one on the right is the half face mask. The one on the left, it just gives you more protection. It covers more versus the one on the right, but the principle of operation is exactly the same. So you look at when they're appropriate, again, from a fire standpoint, EMS incidences, or agriculture, or industrial. It's when stuff is going to be around, stuff's going to be in the air you don't want to breathe in. But you've got one thing to remember is you have to have the same amount of oxygen. You have to have oxygen in the air in order to use these. Otherwise, it's not going to use these. It's not going to work at all. Some of the limitations, and this is both respirators. It's not one or the other. Though it has some wear limitations and you have some equipment limitations. One of them is if you're not in the greatest of shape, both of these respirators can cause some issues, which is why we talked about doctor exams and things like that. You want to have that ahead of time because if you're not in great shape, it makes it much harder to work, much harder to breathe. Also, with that, you have a lack of agility. As you're working, all of a sudden, you're working with an elephant on your back. You got a giant pack on your back and things like that. You just may not be able to move as quickly. Inadequate pulmonary capacity or weakened cardiovascular. With both of these, it's kind of as if you're breathing through a straw. So if you already have asthma or you already have some heart problems, it can make it that much worse. Psychological limitations. And I'll give everybody a chance when we come in for our weekend to use the mask. It can be a little claustrophobic if you're not used to it. If you're not used to it, and all of a sudden you're in the dark, you can't see real well, and then all of a sudden it's like wearing blinders. It can be a challenge. And then unique facial features, not just the wearing a beard, not wearing a beard, or something like that, but everybody has different shapes of faces, and you have to make sure that the respirator actually fits. And I know plenty of people that we could not get a respirator on. It just would not fit, so we had to put them on a job that didn't require a respirator. And then we start looking at equipment limitations. Some of these we talked about already, but the limited visibility. You're wearing blinders, so you may not necessarily be able to see as well. Decreased ability to communicate. It's like you're talking with something right over your face. People can't hear you. Decreased endurance. Most of your tanks are either going to give you a half hour or 45 minutes of air. Personally, I thought those were always a little generous, but maybe it's because I'm not in the best of shape, so I would go through a tank a little bit faster. And then low air cylinder pressure. As you started getting lower and lower and lower, you needed to make sure that you could still get back out. And I made that mistake. Luckily, it was in training, so it wasn't as big of a deal. So I got halfway in, all of a sudden I'm halfway out of air, and by that point I was tired, and it took me that much longer to get back out. So that can be a problem as well. So if you look at how the SCBAs are stored, they're stored in a bunch of different ways. Some of them are stored in the truck, some of them are stored in the cases, some of them are stored in the seats. We'll talk. I mean, it really doesn't make that big of a difference for us, provided that we're. I mean, it depends on what the situation is, whether we have them or don't have them, what we're using them for. A couple things we got to consider before we donning. We want to make sure we inspect them, and it talks about the beginning of shift because it's really designed for full-time career firefighters. But we need to make sure that our SCBAs are on an inspection routine. Are we inspecting them once a week, once a month, once a day? All depends on how likely it is that we're going to be using them. Air cylinder gauge and a remote gauge. We kind of talked about that there's going to be a gauge on the cylinder itself. And then when you hook it up into the whole regulator system, it's going to give you another gauge that you can very easily see. Harness and facepiece straps, I will say you want to make sure that those are fully extended at all times. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. Being a bigger guy, it's kind of hard for me to go and put on a harness right after somebody really small has worn it. It kind of makes me upset. Operate all valves. You want to make sure everything opens and closes clearly. Knowing what your low pressure alarm sounds like. Different SCBAs are different. A lot of them, you'll hear a bell, or your face mask may vibrate, and you'll hear that, and that's what's going to tell you that you're low on air. Pass device, we talked about that quite a bit, and then any battery powered functions. Some of the new ones, they can have they can have the pass built in, they can have lights built in, they can even have a locator so the chief knows where everybody is. So you want to make sure that you know how those work and you have batteries to do it. So how it is, here you go, we talked about that already. There's a couple differences, we talked about that. Some of the older ones, and really the respirators that we would use, maybe not the SCBAs, but the respirators themselves have like a rubber harness around the back versus the mesh. And we talked about the mesh, and we kind of saw the pictures of that, but some of the older ones will actually have the rubber harness, and it's different when you put that on. And then where the regulator is, we talked about that as well. So if we are talking about donning our SCBA and the facepiece and all that, especially the facepiece, we want to make sure that the straps are fully extended, and that's the way it should be left. Now, it's a little different if it's your personal SCBA, but if you're sharing with other people, you want to make sure the straps are left fully extended and no hair in the face seal. And that could be facial hair, or that could be long hair. You just got to make sure that there's no hair right where the seal is going to be. And we'll talk about all of these. We'll actually have people, you'll all wear a mask, maybe not hook you up on air, but we'll actually put you on in a mask at least so you can feel it. And when taking it off, it's basically the opposite. First of all, you want to make sure you're out of the contaminated area. If you're in an area that has the stuff in the air, you don't want to be taking it off there. Once that's off, you want to discontinue the airflow. You don't want it to be blowing air if you don't need to. And then just basically do it in the opposite directions. With that, you want to make sure you turn off the pass. It's kind of funny, at a fire scene, you'll see people kind of jumping around. You'll hear a pass, people jump around a little bit and turn it off. And again, make sure your straps are extended, check your pressure, clean the face piece, clean everything else, and store it right. Then you start getting into your inspections. You want to make sure you inspect it on a regular basis. Make sure that everything that's supposed to be working is working, and nothing's damaged. So in this case, looking at the backpack, make sure it's all in good shape. The straps are in good shape. Nothing's bent. Your breathing air. You want to know what your hydrostatic test date is. All of these tanks you have to inspect on a regular basis. So I'm going to post this PowerPoint itself in addition to the video. That way you can actually take a look at all of these. And if there are any issues, you need to make sure that you've reported them right away. So if you see any abrasions, you see any cracks, hole fittings that are missing, hose connections, if it's not working, any of that stuff you really need to let somebody know right away. You don't want to put it into business, back into service, because the next person that uses it could have problems. And the last thing is, if there's issues with the pressure gauge or the integrated pass, you need to make sure it's tested. You want to make sure that it's operating correctly, and you also need to make sure that the batteries for the integrated pass, you need to make sure that those are set up right. So, and that's pretty much it for this week. A lot of the stuff we talked about is very, very similar to what we're going to have in industry, but at the same time, there are some definite unique aspects to the personal protective equipment that you'd have with the fire department or with your emergency response team than you would with your general respirator protection program.